Hi and welcome to Linus Napoleonic Shipyards. Today we're doing another of my deep dives. They are usually grounded in interest. So right now I am making a gun-brig for my own fleet, and making that I came to think more about carronades. So I dug into it and tried to figure out all I could about the carronade, the history and its use, advantages and disadvantages. So this is going to be about that, the smashers, and how they changed the close quarters combat doctrine at the age. And we're going to start all this at Trafalgar, actually, on October 21st, 1805, at the Battle of Trafalgar, reaching its climax with HMS Victory, with Operation Nelson breaking through the enemy line and directly astern of the French flagship Bucentaure. So close that the British three-deckers yardarms nearly touched the French tricolour flag, or ensign. At exactly 5 yards range, so very close, the boatswain William Wilmette gave the order to fire Victory's port forecastle carronade. And this was one of those really massive carronades. It was a 68-pounder carronade, and that had been carefully loaded with a round shot and 500 musket balls. What happened next was probably the most deadly salvo during the Napoleonic Wars, probably for a long time after as well. The enormous gun roared, and in one terrible instant, the shot and the spray of musket balls swept the entire length of the Bucentaure's gun deck. You have to remember, this was a rake. And according to eyewitness accounts, maybe close to 400 men were killed or wounded in that single devastating blast. That might be an exaggeration, but there was tremendous damage done. The French guns were dismounted, officers cut down, and the ship was effectively put out of action before even Victory started firing its 50 portside long guns in the rake. So that initial blast was really devastating. One of the carronades on the Victory was actually named, because you named all the guns, so this one was named the Smasher. So very aptly named, right? Never was a better weapon better named than that. But how did this devastating weapon come to revolutionize naval combat? And why did its tactical doctrine prove to be both a war winner in some cases, but also perhaps in some cases a fatal trap? We're going to look into it some closer here. This is the story of the carronade and how it changed everything. So the story begins not at sea, but in a Scottish industrial town. In 1759, the Carron Company was established on the banks of the River Carron near Falkirk, Scotland. The company was founded by Dr. John Roebuck, Samuel Garbett, and William Cadell, as one of the pioneering ironworks of Britain's Industrial Revolution. Initially, the company struggled. They manufactured domestic items like pots, pans, stoves, railings, and so on. And they also attempted to break into the lucrative military market with cast iron cannons. Their early guns were, however, quite a disaster. The company received a contract to supply the Royal Navy in 1764, but by 1773, because of the poor quality of the guns, the contract was actually cancelled, and all Carron-made guns were removed from Royal Navy vessels. The company's reputation, I should say, was probably quite in ruins at this point. Enter Charles Gascoigne, who became a partner in 1765 and took over as manager in 1769. Gascoigne pushed forward development of a revolutionary new weapon. Initially, it was called a gasconade, after himself, or a Melvilleade, after the Lieutenant General Robert Melville, who may have co-invented the weapon. But it would be famous under another name, carronade. The invention was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of creating another long gun, Gascoigne engineered a short, wide-mouthed cannon with precise manufacturing that dramatically reduced windage, the gap between the ball and the barrel's interior. And this is very important to get a higher pressure equivalent long gun. This meant quarter the weight, half the gun crew required, in some cases less, faster rate of fire if the crews were properly trained on them, reduced recoil that wouldn't damage the ship timbers, and could be mounted on upper decks without making the ships top heavy, so because of the lighter weight, and much heavier shot for the same gun weight. The mounting system was also revolutionary. Instead of wheeled carriages, like was the norm, the carronade sat on sliding mounts with a lug underneath the barrel, allowing wider arcs of fire, but also an easier elevation with a screw that replaced the traditional wooden quoins for adjusting elevation. The standard package sold by Carron included 25 round shot, 15 bar shot, 15 double-headed shot, 10 single grape shot, and 10 single canister shot per gun. But there was a critical trade-off to this type of gun, the carronade, and that's the range. Carronades typically fired only 1/3 to 1/2 the distance of equivalent long guns. For the 68-pounder carronade on HMS Victory, maximum range was recorded at 1,280 yards or thereabout, with a 5-pound charge and a 5-degree elevation. Effective combat range was, however, much less, much less, maybe 400 yards, probably much less than that. It wasn't seen like a huge problem, however. Naval historian William James later noted that the typical naval tactics of the late 18th century emphasized short-range broadsides. And, you know, at Trafalgar you have Nelson saying you can't go wrong if you put yourself alongside an enemy, right? So ships were designed for close to pistol shot range and just to batter each other to pieces. I mean, this is not entirely true, but there is some truth in it for the bigger engagements. The carronades seemed perfect for the Doctrine. The carronades first went to sea, not on Royal Navy warships, but on merchant vessels during the American Revolutionary War. In the autumn of 1778, Charles Gascoigne contracted Captain William Elphinston to transport Carron products to London. In return, he armed his ships with the new weapon. The Carron Company's sales pamphlet of 1779 specifically marketed carronades for merchant ships as a defense, a lightweight gun that needed only a small crew and was devastating at short range and was well suited for defending merchant ships against French and American privateers. In November 1778, agents in Liverpool purchased 16 carronades to arm the Spitfire, a 200-ton merchantman. She was soon in action and performed brilliantly against pretty heavy odds, actually. By 1779, success stories were flooding in. The captain of the Sharp, out of Glasgow, attributed his victory in an engagement near Cape Clear to the new gun, saying, according to contemporary newspaper accounts, that he never intended to arm anything with anything else in the future. In February 1779, the Carron-armed vessel Sterling was attacked by a French privateer. Her master, John Dick, noted that for every broadside fired by the Frenchman, he could fire 2 with his carronades. The Royal Navy, meanwhile, watched with skepticism. In May 1779, the Earl of Dunmore persuaded King George III to order trials of the new weapon at the Royal Arsenal at Woolwich. The Board of Ordnance remained deeply skeptical, however, preferring traditional long guns because of their greater range. But the Navy Board saw potential. They pointed out that a smaller vessel could, with carronades, throw a greater weight of broadside. In July 1779, the carronade officially was accepted for naval service. The Admiralty Order of July 13, 1779 established a scale for arming different rates of vessels. First rates of 100 guns received 2 carronades on the forecastle and 8 on the poop. Second and fourth second, third, and fourth rates received 2 on the poop and 6 on the forecastle. Fifth and sixth rates had carronades only on the forecastle. Importantly, carronades were not counted in the ship's rated number of guns. So, for instance, a 74-gun ship might actually carry 80 guns or even more if carronades were included, a detail that would prove tactically significant. By 1782, over 1,000 carronades had been supplied to the Royal Navy, and the Carron Company was producing 60 to 80 carronades per week. And now we get to the first, a bigger experiment. It's called the Rainbow experiment, and that's the ship HMS Rainbow. And this is in the spring of 1782. The 35-year-old at this point, two-decked British fifth-rate Rainbow was fitted out at Chatham with a battery consisting entirely of carronades. Commodore Hon Keith Stewart promoted the experiment and recommended Captain Henry Trollope, then a 26-year-old, as the officer with the technical knowledge of gunnery to make it work. The armament was, staggering. On the lower deck, 20 68-pounder carronades. On the main deck, 20 42-pounder carronades. On the quarterdeck and forecastle, 6 32-pounder carronades. Rainbow's broadside weight was 1,238 pounds, more than many ships of the line. And that's also pointed out by naval historian Nicholas Rogers, who notes that she was far more powerful than any ship on the sea, bar a sail of the line. But could it work in combat? That's the question, right? So on September 4th, 1782, Rainbow was off the French coast near Ile-de-Bats when the lookout spotted a frigate escorting a small convoy from Saint-Malo to Brest. Trollope immediately gave chase. The enemy vessel was the Abbé, a brand new French frigate of the Abbé class, 1,063 tons, mounting 38 guns, 26 18-pounders, and these are long guns, and 12 8-pounders. She was commanded by Chevalier de Vigny, father of the famous French writer Alfred de Vigny, and he had a crew of 360 men. At 6 a.m., Rainbow identified her target as a frigate. At 7 a.m., Trollope was able to open fire with his forecastle's 32-pounder carronades. The French responded half an hour later by hoisting colors and firing stern chasers. For the next hour and a half, the ships maneuvered for position. Trollope was determined to close to range. His carronades were useless at a distance. Captain de Vigny, however, didn't really yet understand what he was facing. According to more detailed accounts from the Naval Chronicle, when Rainbow's bow chaser carronades struck home, they caused an inordinate amount of consternation upon the French frigate. The shots blasted away Ebbe's wheel, damaged her foremast, and killed her second captain, Yves Gabriel de Landy. De Vigny examined the fragments of one of the hollow carronade shots. Drawing the obvious conclusion from the massive size of the projectile, he decided Rainbow must in fact be not a frigate but a 74-gun ship of the line in disguise. So, rather than be pounded to pieces by a superior force, he gave his convoy time to escape by luffing up and discharging one broadside, pour l'honneur du pavillon, for the honor of the flag, right? And then he struck his colors. The action was over at 8:30 a.m. When de Vigny was brought aboard the Rainbow, it is said, and I'm not sure this could be his legend, that when he discovered it was a fifth-rate frigate with just a crew of 260 men, 100 fewer than his own, he was almost moved to tears. Rainbow's casualties was 1 man killed, 2 slightly wounded. Ebbe's 5 killed and several wounded. The Chevalier de Vigny would face a court-martial, and the Council of War condemned him to 15 years in prison, declaring him unfit for service. But I don't know, was this judgment fair? I really doubt it. Modern historians debate this. De Vigny faced an opponent armed with weapons firing shot 3 times heavier than anything on his broadside. All the ranges where the French long guns couldn't effectively respond. Also, he was at the range where they can really 68-pounders throwing 68-pound shot. Hebei's main battery consisted of 18-pounders. I mean, I think the physics are brutally simple. If they're close, the heavier weight of shot is going to really tell, right? The Royal Navy had just demonstrated that carronades could revolutionize combat if you could force an enemy into close quarters. And we're going to explore this further, and also with the same captain, Captain Henry Trollope. He was now established as a carronade crazy, and that is what he was later dubbed. And he would get a second chance to prove the concept. In 1795, as the French Revolutionary Wars threatened Britain and the Royal Navy was desperate and short of ships, as a stopgap measure, the Admiralty purchased some East Indiamen, and these were really stoutly built merchantman vessels, and they were operated by the East India Company. I mean, quite the sturdy vessels in their own right. One of these was the Glatton, and she was a 1,253-ton ship, so quite large, that had already participated in the capture of a French brig while part of a trading convoy. Trollope was given command and permission to arm her as he saw fit. And he then chose to arm her entirely with carronades. On the lower deck, 28 68-pounder carronades. And then on the upper deck, she had 2 gun decks, and on the upper, like the spar deck, the upper deck, she had 28 42-pounder carronades. So she was classed like a 4th-rate ship of the line with 56 guns, and she could now discharge a heavier broadside than Victory herself, like HMS Victory. And Victory is a 1st-rate ship of the line, mind you, with over 100 guns, right? But the broadside weight of the Glatton, a 4th rate, was larger due to the carronades. But there were significant limitations. The gun ports were too small to allow training off the beam, and the deck layout didn't permit bow or stern chasers. The Glatton would be needed to be carefully maneuvered to bring her tremendous firepower to bear. Trollope himself was confident. In a letter to John Wells, the shipbuilder and former owner, he wrote, "I sincerely hope we will meet with an 74 in the Glatton. She would entirely take her or sink her in 20 minutes." So that's quite a bit of confidence there. On July the 15th, he got a chance to show it. July the 15th, 1796, I should say. In the early afternoon, Glatton was cruising off the Dutch coast when Trollope sighted a powerful French squadron, a 50-gun ship, a couple of frigates and 2 36 guns, and 3 of 28, a brig and a cutter, so a squadron. Those were overwhelming, and I think most commanders, any sane commander, would have fled, I think. Trollope, he cleared for action and steered toward the enemy. As one later account noted, that he was allowed to come so close is a mystery, as is the fact that the enemy was so rigidly attached to line tactics in the circumstances. The French formed a line and shortened sail to maintain station. So they're really playing into Trollope's hands here. It was late evening when Trollope drew level with the 3rd ship of the enemy line that he hailed her in French and ordered her to strike. The response, it is said, came in what is described as bad English, and it was a complete refusal. The French commodore's broad pennant was revealed, and all vessels opened fire simultaneously. Now began what would become a 13-hour running battle. According to more detailed account, Trollope directed his crew, with 2nd Lieutenant Alexander Schomburg coordinating the cruise. Men rushed from side to side to load her carronades, with picked men left to point and fire the smashers, so that the rate of fire could be maximized. The French, following standard naval doctrine, aimed their shot high to disable their opponent, so they were targeting the rigging and the mast and so on. Glatton's massive carronades were returning fire, but into the enemy hulls, firing at such close range that at times the Glatton's yardarms were nearly touching those of the enemy, less than 20 yards. The French Commodore attempted to end the action by having his lead ship drive Glatton onto a nearby shoal, but Trollope skillfully maneuvered, allowing him to tack away and rake the French vessel in turn. as it too had to change course. By nightfall, Glatton's masts, yards, and sails were badly damaged. Her crew worked through the night making repairs, and at dawn the French squadron was seen running for the port of Flushing. Trollope pursued for 2 more hours before breaking off, heading for Yarmouth roads, arriving on July the 21st. Glatton's casualties were 2 wounded, 1 who died later. The French casualties are unknown, but all the ships were severely damaged, and 1 actually sank in Flushing Harbour later on. Captain Trollope had taken on a squadron 6 times his strength and driven them all into port. So quite a test of the carronade. So while Captain Trollope was proving that the carronades could be effective on larger warships, the Royal Navy was simultaneously developing a very different application for the weapon. One that would become far more numerous and perhaps even more important to Britain's naval supremacy. In December 1800, as Napoleon consolidated his power in France and invasion threats loomed across the Channel, the Admiralty ordered a batch of 10 small warships by design from the Navy surveyor Sir William Rule. These were the Archer-class gun-brigs, and they represented a revolution in coastal warfare. The specifications were modest: 179 tons burden, 80 feet and 2 inches overall length, including the bowsprit, and they were to be 2-masted and brig-rigged. The crew was just under 50 men, and they would be an unrated vessel under command of a lieutenant. But their armament was pure carronade doctrine. 10 18-pounder carronades on their broadsides, and just 2 12-pounder, or in some cases 18-pounder long guns as bow chasers. Think about those numbers for a moment. A broadside weight of 90 pounds from a vessel displacing less than 200 tons. That is quite a firepower to weight ratio, and would have been impossible with conventional long guns. And 50-man crew, a comparable armament of long guns would have required twice that number at least. So a small crew manning a small ship, but with a heavy gun weight. The gun brigs were purpose-built for the carronade era. According to contemporary records, they were intended to bolster the Royal Navy's capacity to hunt small French privateers and to act in anti-invasion craft should France attempt to land troops in the British Isles. In these 2 roles, the carronade's short range was no disadvantage. The fighting would be close quarters by definition. One of these 10 vessels was HMS Constant, and that's the one I've chosen to depict and to make a part of my fleet. She was launched in Deptford in April 1801, and over the next 15 years she would prove her worth and the worth of the gun-brig concept in general across every theatre of the Napoleonic Wars. Constant service record reads like a tour of the British naval operations. So you have the English home waters, you have the Baltic, you have the Caribbean, and also the coast of Spain, Mediterranean. She was responsible for the capture of at least 7 enemy vessels, more actually probably, privateers, merchantmen, and warships. Under command of Lieutenant Thomas Stokes, Constant's actions demonstrate exactly why carronade-armed gun-brigs was so effective. In 1806, operating in the channel off the Dutch coast, she captured some Dutch merchant vessels, including a 75-foot brig and a 68-foot oy. They captured vessels, and the cargoes of tallow, wine, and herring were auctioned for prize money at Great Yarmouth. In September the 5th of 1810, Constant was operating with the frigate HMS Sauveillant off the Loire River when they spotted a French merchant convoy heading for the Gulf of Morbihan. The British gave chase and forced a French brig to seek shelter close to shore, protected by 2 batteries of French cannon. The water was too shallow for Sauveillant's deeper draft, but the Constant could get in close. Lieutenant Stokes brought his gun brig right into the shallows. According to historical accounts, She was brought so close to shore that to support the attack that the crew was exchanging musket and gunfire with French troops located on the beach. While surveillance boats boarded the French brig Constant's carronades kept the shore batteries and the troops suppressed. It was exactly the kind of inshore work that this vessel would excel at. In 1813, Constant operated off the coast of Spain during the July and August, and she was part of a squadron of some 17 vessels that participated in the siege of San Sebastian. Because of the shallowness of the water, only the smaller vessels like Constance could approach closely enough to bring their guns to bear on the town's defenses. On October 13, 1813, Constant participated in the destruction of the French 16-gun brig Filibustière in the mouth of the Ardor River. Filibustière had been sheltering at St. Jean-de-Luz under the shore batteries, but Wellington's army was approaching. She attempted to escape during a dark and stormy night. But another vessel immediately pursued. Another British vessel immediately pursued. And after 3/4 of an hour of close action, the French crew spotted Constant and HMS Challenger coming up to join the fight. Rather than face 3 British ships, some of them armed with heavy carronades, the crew set her on fire and escaped the shore. She blew up shortly after. This might not be like this famous single ship actions that you would read about in history books, but I think they represent the real work during the Napoleonic Wars, like convoy protection, coastal patrol, commerce raiding, and endless small actions that slowly strangled the French maritime trade. And the Archer class was just the beginning. By 1805, 58 gun-brigs of this design had been built, and when you add in the other classes of gun-brigs, like the Acute class and the Caruso class and the Confounder class, the numbers become staggering. These small carronade-armed vessels were built by the hundreds during the Napoleonic Wars, and they were cheap, about £4,000 per vessel compared to the 40,000 for a frigate, so a tenth of the price. They were fast to build, months rather than years, and they were exactly what the Royal Navy needed. Mobile firepower that could operate in waters too shallow for frigates, with crews small enough that manning wasn't a chronic problem. HMS Constant herself survived the wars. She was declared surplus to the Navy's requirements in 1815 when the Treaty of Paris was formally brought the end with France to an end. She was sold at Chatham Dockyard on February 15, 1816 for a total of £600. 15 years of hard service complete. Her story, multiplied across hundreds of sister ships, is perhaps the most successful application of the carronade doctrine in the entire age of sail, if you ask me. So we have another solution. So the Americans, what they did, because they also used the carronades, right? So while the British were building hundreds of small carronade-armed coastal fighters, the Americans were developing a very different approach. The Americans, watching these developments carefully, developed what would prove to be the ultimate carronade doctrine. The U.S. Navy's super-frigates, Constitution, United States, and Presidents, were designed with a mixed armament that combined the range of long guns with the devastating close-range firepower of the carronades. We take USS Constitution, for instance, and the War of 1812 armament that was typical on the gun decks. 30 24-pounder long guns, and on the spar deck, 24 32-pounder carronades. For boat chasers, 2 long 18-pounders. This gave the American commanders tactical flexibility. As naval historian Spencer C. Trucker notes in his article, The U.S. Navy's Smashers, both used cannons to shatter timbers at a distance and carronades up close to kill the men. The tactical doctrine was clear. Use the long-range guns to damage rigging and hulls while closing the range, then devastate the enemy with the carronades as close quarters. Captain Isaac Hull demonstrated this perfectly in Constitution's victory over HMS Guerriere on August 19, 1812. After moving to close range, Constitution discharged devastating broadsides that dismasted the British frigate. Contemporary accounts describe Constitution's spar-deck carronades as particularly effective at killing exposed personnel and destroying the Guerriera's lighter scantlings. In the action against HMS Java on December 29, 1812, Commodore William Bainbridge later noted in a letter, "In the action with the Java, 2 of the carronades on board the Constitution were in the early part of the action struck with violence by the enemy round shot, so much so as to make a considerable indentation in the guns. Yet these carronades continued the remainder of the action in active and serviceable fire, and are to this day safe pieces of ordnance." The durability of the well-manufactured carronades was impressive. Captain Charles Stewart demonstrated the ultimate expression of this mixed armament doctrine on February 20th, 1815, 3 days after the Treaty of Ghent was signed, though of course the combatants didn't know this yet, when the Constitution engaged HMS Cyan, 24 guns, and HMS Levant of 18 guns, simultaneously off Madeira. In Stewart's official report, he described the action beginning at 6:05 p.m. And commenced by the action by broadsides, both ships returning fire with great spirit for about 12 minutes. Then the fire of the enemy beginning to slacken. Through brilliant ship handling, Stewart was able to position Constitution to rake each British vessel in turn, using his long guns at medium range and his carronades when the ships closed. HMS Cyan's Captain Falcon spilled the wind from the main topsail in an attempt to close range and bring his own carronades into play. Stewart fired a broadside into Levant and ordered Constitution's mizzen topsail backed and maneuvered to engage from optimal range. Both British vessels struck their colours. It was one of the most brilliant demonstrations of seamanship and tactics in the war. So the Constitution's balanced armament between the carronade and the long guns, and those were heavy long guns, I have to say, on those bigger American frigates, 24-pounder long gun, and I discussed this in an earlier video. They were quite heavy. Many of those Versailles and super-frigates were armed with those. So what happened then? I mean, why wasn't it more widely used though? So there was something. The carronade had a fatal weakness that had been apparent from the beginning, and one American captain would learn this lesson in the most brutal way possible. Captain David Porter took command of the frigate USS Essex in 1812. She was unusual and armed almost entirely with carronades, 40 32-pounder carronades and only 6 12-pounder long guns. Porter himself objected to this armament. As naval historian Samuel J. Cox notes, Porter was quick to point out her key weakness. In a letter to the Navy Department, Porter warned that the British frigates with more long guns could maneuver and stand off bombarding Essex from outside of carronade range. His warning was prescient, and typically nothing was done about it. Essex had a spectacular cruise in the Pacific, devastating the British whaling industry, and you can find this in many other places, videos by, for instance, Drakinefeld and so on. And she captured prizes to a value of more than $5 million. But on February 8th of 1814, HMS Phoebe of 36 guns and HMS Shepherd of 18 guns blockaded the Essex in the Chilean port of Valparaiso. And we actually played this using Black Six rules a while back. You can find a video on my channel about how that played out for us. For 6 weeks, the ship sat in harbour, exchanging insults. Porter displayed his famous Free Trade and Sailors' Right banner, and the British responded by God and country, traitors offend both. British Captain James Hillier, a veteran of the Mauritius and Java campaigns, knew his business. During the prisoner exchange in port, he gained vital intelligence. Essex was armed almost entirely with carronades. Hillier also declined Porter's challenge to a single-ship duel. He was content to wait. On March 28, 1814, Porter attempted to escape. A sudden squall struck Essex and carried away her main topmast, a navigational disaster that drastically reduced her ability to maneuver. Essex limped to anchor just outside of Valparaiso harbor. Hillier now had his opportunity. HMS Phoebe mounted 30 18-pounder long guns, and according to calculations from naval historians, Phoebe's broadside at a long range was 255 pounds. Essex was effectively zero. She only had 6 12-pounder long guns that could respond. Hillier positioned Phoebe at 250 yards and opened fire at 4:02 p.m. 4:20 p.m. He placed Cherub on Essex' starboard bow and Phoebe under her stern, positions where Essex couldn't effectively return fire. For 2.5 hours, the British ships systematically pounded the Essex to pieces, staying beyond the carronade's range. Porter's crew attempted desperately to bring their guns to bear, but the springs on the anchor cables were shot away. 3 times they tried, 3 times they failed. The Essex became a slaughterhouse. Contemporary accounts describe men throwing themselves overboard to escape the carnage, only to be cut down by brisk British musket fire. Fires broke out twice, and the ship's marine contingent exposed on the spar deck suffered horrific casualties. With 58 dead, 65 wounded and 31 missing, 159 casualties out of 266 men, that's nearly 60% of the crew, and his ship sinking and a burning wreck, Porter finally struck his colors. British casualties were 5 dead, 10 wounded in total across both ships. As one Essex survivor later wrote, with a bitter irony, range, not weight of metal, was critical in the battle. Captain Porter later wrote in his official report about the advantage provided by Rainbow's unusual armament, but he also accurately noted that long-range a warship armed largely with carronades would have to be fast so that she could close on her opponent. Essex wasn't fast enough. With her topmast gone, she had no chance. The lesson was clear. Carronades were devastating, but only if you could close action. Against an opponent who could maintain range and maneuver, they were worse than useless. They were a death trap. So in conclusion, what are we to make of the carronade's tactical legacy? At its introduction, the carronade was revolutionary. It gave merchant ships effective defense and armament with small crews, and allowed naval vessels to mount much heavier firepower on upper decks without making them top-heavy. It required smaller gun crews, crucial when manpower was always scarce, and at close range they were absolutely devastating. The numbers tell the story. Rainbow versus Ebay, and the Glatton versus the French squadron, and so on. The victories smasher at Trafalgar. And you have the Constitution against the Cyan and Levant, and so on. And of course the successful career of HMS Constant. So, but even with all these successes, Essex disaster demonstrated the fatal flaw. Doctrine mattered more than firepower. A ship armed primarily with carronades was committed to close action against an opponent who could maintain range, either through superior sailing, damage, or to a rigging or simple tactical discipline. Then the carronade-heavy ship was helpless. A successful American doctrine, the mixing of the long guns and carronades, acknowledged this reality. You needed long guns to damage the enemy and fight your way into carronade range. You needed the carronades to deliver the knockout blow once you got there. By the 1810s and 1820s, as Captain Spencer C. Trucker notes, tactics started to place a greater emphasis on accuracy of long-range gunfire. Engagement ranges were increasing. Gun design was improving. The carronades movement had more or less passed. By the 1850s, carronades disappeared from the Royal Navy's as Armstrong Withrow developed the rifle steel jacket cannon. Naval warfare was entering a new age, one of longer ranges, explosive shells, and eventually breech-loading guns. But for nearly 70 years, the carronade had ruled the close quarters battle. it had changed tactical doctrine, influenced ship design, and delivered some of the most devastating broadsides in naval history. So that's all from this short, scripted, a little bit, I don't know what I should call these ones really, documentaries, I don't know. So they're all sparred by my own interest really, but I hope I can spread some of that interest to you guys, and that it could inspire you maybe when you're building your own models. Like for me with this HMS Constant, my first pure gun-brig. I'm really looking forward to using that in my fleet later on, and maybe actually for a single ship action like I wrote earlier would be a lot of fun. So I hope you enjoy this, as I said, and if you like the video, give the video a like, please. That helps. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please give me a subscribe. That also helps me. I'm trying to build this out bit by bit and having fun while I do it. So until next one, I wish you guys fair winds.